Hello everyone, and I'm Autobot Sonic the Telltale Gamer, bringing lasers and Telltale games, Transformers, and more. Welcome back to another Transformers EarthSpark review, and this is the penultimate review for this batch of EarthSpark episodes. After this, next week will be the last review of EarthSpark until we get the final batch sometime later this year. So for today's EarthSpark review, we're going to be looking at Transformers EarthSpark Season 1, Episode 16, Warzone. With this episode, it's easily one of my top 3 favorite episodes, up there with Security Protocols and Outtakes. Probably this is my second favorite episode of this whole batch, just behind Security Protocols. I absolutely love the lore we get in this episode. It's easily the most impactful episode that Megatron has in the entirety of EarthSpark so far. Before this, I really enjoyed his depiction in Episode 2, Secret Legacy Part 2, and Episode 8, Decoy, but this episode is easily the best one with Megatron in it by far, and really dives into his character in this episode. And also, surprisingly, it's a heavy, really Thrash-centric episode as well. Even though he's not really the main character in this episode, he does go through a sort of arc on his own, which I feel fits him a lot based on what we saw him do, especially back in Episode 4, House Rules. And we, of course, also get introduced to a brand new character in the EarthSpark continuity in this episode as well. So if you're excited as I am to talk about this episode, be sure to like, comment, and of course subscribe. Let's go ahead and see everything this episode did right and what it did wrong. Warzone starts off with a flashback to the climactic battle that ended the Transformers War on Earth, which we heard Alex talk about to Robbie and Mo back in Episode 1. In this battle, we get to see a lot of returning characters that we've seen throughout the past 15 episodes come back, including Bumblebee, Optimus, Megatron, Skywarp, Novastorm, RC, and all of them. Granted, not a lot of these characters are actually talking, but it is cool to see them all. I especially love, too, how in this flashback, Bumblebee has a totally different body, considering his alt mode in this is supposed to be a Volkswagen Beetle, which is a nice little callback to how he had that alt mode during the, it was stated he had that alt mode during the war in earlier episodes, because based on how this is supposed to be the fight that ended the Transformers War, we can chalk this up to taking place at some point during 2005 to 2006, because that's when Megatron joined Ghost, and I absolutely love the cinematography in this fight. The way it reminds me a lot actually of Episode 3 of Season 1 of Cyberverse AllSpark, where pretty much the same thing that was happening in that episode is happening in this one, where B is seen basically doing this intense baton race, essentially, with the AllSpark, trying to get it to the space bridge, and it's just super insane. He's seen him dodging a bunch of Insecticons, getting about to get tackled by Skullcruncher, so he tosses it off over to Optimus, who ends up trying to take the AllSpark to the space bridge next. And I absolutely love how it seems like it almost has like a sort of one-take feel to it that I absolutely love. He drops it, and then it rolls over to Starscream, who we finally get to hear properly. He literally has like 2 lines throughout this entire episode, but it's so good to properly hear Steve Blum return as Starscream again, having last voiced him in Prime and Robots in Disguise 2015, about 5 years ago, back in 2017. I think Steve Blum does a perfect job of voicing Starscream the same way he did in Prime and RAD-15, where he still has that very snivelly Orochimaru style voice that pretty much inspired his original voice of Starscream back in Prime, and his EarthSpark Starscream voice is almost indistinguishable from that of his Prime and RID-15 Starscream voice. I absolutely love it, even though we only hear it, this is the only time he speaks in this whole batch of episodes. I really hope Starscream does have a bigger role in the final batch of episodes, considering they made such a big deal about him in the ending of Episode 8 in the last batch, and they only showed him once outside of this in the start of Episode 11, that's it. So as Starscream gets the AllSpark trying to get it away from them, Megatron just suddenly immediately lands on top of Starscream and grabs the AllSpark from him, so he starts trying to run away while Starscream's shooting at him. Eventually, though, he gets stopped right in front of the space bridge by Soundwave, who does a big, large Soundwave to basically knock him down, along with Starscream and Novastorm popping on top of his back, trying to hold him down as well. And of course, we get to hear more of Starscream just taunting. Man, it really makes me hope that we get more of Starscream in the next batch, because even though he only has these 2 lines in this one episode, Steve Blum it's so great to hear him as Starscream again. However, just as it seems as though Starscream's gonna pry his AllSpark out of Megatron's hands, Optimus takes aim with his ion cannon on top of a hill at the space bridge, and with a perfect timing, Megatron breaks free from Starscream and Novastorm and tosses the AllSpark into the space bridge just as Optimus shoots it, causing the whole space bridge to explode, and everyone is just looking in shock as the AllSpark is presumably destroyed in the explosion with the space bridge, or maybe just taken back to Cybertron, just floating somewhere in space. I don't really know, but it is cool. I just love the parallels to this, because it really, really feels like how Episode 3 of Cyberverse was, where essentially the same concept, essentially, that Bumblebee and Optimus are basically just playing the baton race with the AllSpark, trying to get it through the space bridge so that Megatron couldn't get it. Though this time, Megatron's the one helping the Autobots get the AllSpark off of to the space bridge, which I really, really enjoy. After the AllSpark disappears in the space bridge, there's this really cool transition to show the passage of time where we see a large pan out of all the Autobots and Decepticons staring at the destroyed space bridge, and then it just sort of fades to nighttime, roughly 15 to 17 years later, as it's now 2021 when EarthSpark takes place, and we see the destroyed crater that where the space bridge once was, surrounded by a bunch of memorials and all this overgrown moss. And we pass over to sort of this really cute recreation of the final fight, where we see Robbie, Mo, and all the rest of the Terrans sort of LARPing as all the different Autobots and Decepticons trying to use a trash can as the AllSpark, pretending to get it over to the space bridge. We have Twitch pretending to be Optimus, Mo pretending to be Dot, Nightshade pretending to be Starscream, and hashtag Soundwave. I absolutely love how cute it is that they're just trying to make a game of this, because it really feels like, you know, like a lot of kids who would have had their parents or other ancestors or family members who were war veterans. I know, like, to be like fair, it is a little bit sensitive, but of course you've always had like those kids who had like military parents or other family members who sort of idolized their job as soldiers in the war, and so therefore when they were kids they would often play soldiers and like replicating those battles. Though it does kind of come back to bite them a bit when Twitch grabs the trash can and tosses over to Megatron, who in their game is the space bridge. Though out of like some sort of PTSD response, I'm gonna say, Megatron just instantly turns around and shoots the trash can, destroying it, and that scares everyone, thinking that maybe he's like gonna turn on them or something. But Megatron thankfully calms down and apologizes for the outburst, which I absolutely love. This next part's to go as he explains to them all why he brought them to the Space Bridge Memorial, which I absolutely love. This episode also gives a lot of close-ups on Megatron throughout the entirety of it, and it's just, compared to all the pristine, fresh bodies of the Terrans, it is really cool contrast to see just how ragged and like damaged Megatron's body is throughout this whole episode. Like, you can see several points where you can get close-ups of his body and all the scars he carries. Like, you see there's sometimes close-ups of his feet, and you can see all the like chunks of armor that are ripped out of his feet too. And even most recently, across the left side of his chest towards his arm, you can even see a long scar across the left side of his chest from where Mandroid tried to cut his arm off back in episodes 9 and 10, which I think is a really, really cool addition. That the fact that, oh yeah, this event happened where Mandroid almost ripped off Megatron's arm, but that's it, we're not going to address it all. But the fact that Megatron still has that scar from that event really adds a bit of permanence to that event, and that feels like it really did matter. And sure, maybe it didn't affect Megatron a lot psychologically, he still has the physical scar from that moment, and I really love when shows or games do that, where characters will be impacted in some way by a big event in their life, whether it be through a physical mark on their body or even some sort of emotional change in them over that. I'm just a sucker for that. I know it's a small thing, but I really like it. This scene right here is absolutely so powerful because Megatron starts off by saying how coming back to the Space Bridge Memorial Park brings up a lot of bad memories for him, and it pretty much it gives it right there that he does have sort of PTSD from that, saying that some scars can't always be seen. And I love how all the Terrans just sort of acknowledge this and apologize for being insensitive to Megatron in that regards. Though there is this one little moment here when Jawbreaker is talking and apologizing. He's like, oh, well, I don't have any scars, but and then it's literally just a tiny thing, but I love how naive Jawbreaker is. And even though he's not exactly the brightest tool in the shed, he is trying his best to try and sympathize with Megatron, which I do enjoy. So I think it's then Thrash or hashtag that then asks why Megatron brought them all here, and Megatron explains that to basically just learn more about their ancestors' past during the war and all the mistakes they made, which, as a fan of just the Transformers franchise in total, specifically the IDW comics, I absolutely love this next scene. So Megatron ends up bringing everyone into the proper bit of the Space Bridge Memorial Park, where he steps on this big pedestal, and it brings like this big holographic projection of the AllSpark, which everyone is staring at it all. And I again also love the music that's playing throughout the scene as well. I forget for the life of me who composed the music for EarthSpark, but they did a fantastic job with soundtrack, and this is just another great song that they've composed for this whole thing. So as Megatron is showing them all the the projection, the AllSpark, he basically goes over the basis of the battle for the space bridge, saying how many lives were all lost and all that. Though there is like these big cringe points where Megatron is like explaining like if they know what the AllSpark is, and hashtag totally interprets the wrong way and just jumps in front of Megatron to take a selfie with him and the AllSpark. And I mean, it's a hilarious thing, but then I'm just like, hashtag baby, read the room, please. Oh, like I was cringing, like, hashtag come on, man. Megatron has PTSD here. Don't make him feel any worse about this. Just trying to make light of such a traumatic event. But after that, Robbie and Mo clarify to them that it is, in fact, the AllSpark. And I absolutely love this as an IDW fan. So on the projection of the AllSpark, you can see a lot of these blue digital flowers that are all over the AllSpark, kind of like moss almost. And Robbie, Mo, and Megatron explain to everyone else that these flowers are what they call Cybertronian remembrance flowers, with each of them holding a bit of the essence of a Transformer Spark who died during that battle. And I absolutely, as someone who is a big fan of the IDW comics, I love this because these flowers are a direct copy from the flowers that are a big plot point in the end of More Than Meets the Eye. So, minor spoilers here for the end of More Than Meets the Eye comics, but towards the end, Rodimus and his crew, including Megatron, go to this planet called Necro World, which is basically run by this guy called the Necrobot. On Necro World, there's a bunch of statues of every single Transformer that's ever lived. With each statue, it shows a hologram of that Transformer, and if they're dead, the hologram is gone, but if they're alive, the hologram's still there. In front of every statue, or surrounding every statue, flowers are planted by the Necrobot, basically showing off every single Transformer that Transformer has killed, or is indirectly responsible for their death. So with some characters like Rodimus or Tailgate and Drift, you'll see a few, like dozen or even like 100 or so. But the biggest thing here that I absolutely love is when you get to Megatron's grave, and it's such a powerful moment in the comic because when Megatron gets to his own memorial, you can see there is a whole like field of flowers that stretches for miles to show off all the genocide and like devastation he did during his time as leader of Decepticons. And it's such a powerful image there. And to see such a profound image from the IW comics brought over to EarthSpark, I absolutely love it. Granted, the meaning of the flowers has changed slightly, where in More Than Meets the Eye, it meant basically the flowers represented every single Transformer that Cybertronian killed. Here it just represents every single Autobot and Decepticon that died in the battle for the space bridge, which, though, it is a bit of a change, but I do really, really like the change. As Megatron explains to everyone else the meaning of the Cybertronian flowers and just how important the battle for the space bridge was, Thrash suddenly just goes ahead and asks Megatron why the battle is so important to the Terrans, who really had no point in that fight, that they weren't really involved in it, so why should they care about it? And this sets up Thrash's character arc throughout this episode as well. While it's not as big of an arc as the one Megatron goes through this episode, I do enjoy how Thrash learns to become more, I guess, self-aware and selfless throughout this episode. Because as we saw back in his arc in House Rules in episode 4, Thrash really struggles with sort of having, he believes in sort of having a warped sense of what's fair and what's not. So Dot was not wanting Swindle to come to the Malta homestead when he was saying that he needed help to track down his brother Hardtop. Thrash thought it wasn't fair that Dot and the rest of the Maltos were rejecting him just because he was a Decepticon. So I really enjoy this, how Thrash is sort of a Decepticon sympathizer, but also at the same point, he feels that since he wasn't around for the war, why should he be forced to take on the burden of saving the Cybertronian race after Megatron essentially ruined it for everyone. I think Thrash is being a bit disrespectful here, but at the same time, though, I understand why he's doing that. So I really think that Zeno Robinson does a great job as Thrash this episode, just as Rory McCann does as Megatron. They're both easily the stars of this episode, in my opinion. But after Thrash asks, Megatron answers by basically explaining that so many Cybertronians and humans alike died during the war as a result of his actions as the leader of Decepticons, and he wanted to do right by that. And I absolutely love how he explains to Thrash and everyone else what made him change sides. So, in most Transformers continuities, it's either Optimus, Bumblebee, or usually a mix of both that causes Optimus or Megatron to finally switch sides and maybe end the war. But how does EarthSpark Megatron get on the Autobot side? It wasn't Optimus, it wasn't Bumblebee, it was none other than Dot that actually convinced Megatron to switch sides, which I think is absolutely incredible. It wasn't Optimus that did it, it wasn't Bumblebee, it was Dot. And honestly, Dot is the MVP of the Transformers EarthSpark universe. The fact that she alone got Megatron to switch sides just by being so compassionate. She literally pulled the hardest talk no jutsu on Megatron of all people. Something that Optimus can rarely do by himself in every other Transformers continuity. The fact that Dot was able to single-handedly switch Megatron over to the Autobots is something I think is incredible. The fact that he was so moved by a human. The fact that his actions caused unspeakable damage on this other race from another planet. I think that is such a good message to show that Megatron didn't realize the error of his ways until he saw how it affected other people, not just other Cybertronians, but these humans who, for all intents and purposes, had no place in this war. It wasn't their fight at all, and yet several thousands, I assume, were dying as a result, which is just such a good message to show people that how your actions can have consequences on just so many people, and I really, really love that message. Megatron then continues explaining to the Terrans how important Dot's effect was on him by finally getting him to see how precious each and every individual life is, whether it be Autobot, Decepticon, or human, and just finally got him to switch sides and end the war, and basically he shows him more about how much the Decepticon brought havoc to Earth and ended so many lives. So he shows across this little hologram that he displays on this wall of bunch of presumable dead Cybertronians who died during the whole entire war. Now, before anyone asks, no, there's no point in translating all Cybertronian text on this wall, because for people who did try to translate it, it is all just gibberish. It's not even like indecipherable text. It's actual Cybertronian text, but all the letters are just jumbled up together and just a bunch of gibberish. My guess is they probably did this because in case if maybe they had someone's name on here that they actually wanted to put in a future season of EarthSpark, they couldn't, because then it'd be, oh, well, why are they dead on this wall then? So I do like that they actually used proper Cybertronian text, but just made it a bunch of gibberish so that they don't write themselves into a corner by killing off some big Autobot or Decepticon that they wanted to maybe put later on this show. So Megatron shows off several images throughout the war of the Autobots, Decepticons battling in different areas. We see one of Optimus and Alita battling Soundwave in Times Square, all of the Decepticons blowing up Big Ben. The one that gets that I'm sure a lot of people are excited by the most is this one shot of what appears to be Blitzwing and Astro Train attacking the White House. So as funny as this is, especially the way Blitzwing is pointing at the White House in one of those that one meme pic I know everyone is aware of, but I absolutely love though that we actually get a proper look at what a hypothetical EarthSpark Blitzwing could look like, and he bears a very striking resemblance to his G1 design as opposed to his animated design, which I'm not saying that I hate the animated design. I think I prefer it more than the G1 design, but it is cool to see EarthSpark put its own spin on G1 Blitzwing design, and it really makes me hope that, considering they have Blitzwing's design sort of finalized here in this piece of art, maybe either in the final batch of Season 1 or maybe in Season 2, we'll actually get to see Blitzwing at some point in the future. And I would wonder if maybe they'll keep his 3 personalities that Animated introduced, or would they just keep him with 1 personality like in G1 and IDW? It'd be really interesting to see. As Megatron shows off all these images of the war to Robbie Moe and the rest of the Terrans, he explains that the reason why the war was fought over the AllSpark was because whoever controlled the AllSpark had the power to create a brand new army of Transformers that could turn the tide of the war in whichever way they wanted to. So Megatron explains that he wanted to use the AllSpark to create his own army of new Decepticons that could help win the war and basically just conquer Earth and turn it into Cybertron 2, essentially, which is very similar to not only Prime Megatron's goal, but also Cyberverse Megatron's goal back in Seasons 1 and 2, where he planned to use Vector Sigma to create a whole new race of Decepticons. And EarthSpark is taking stuff from other versions of Megatron and sort of blending that into their own version of him, which I really like. They're still doing their own thing with EarthSpark Megatron, but then still bring in stuff from other incarnations of him, which is really, really cool, and explains to them that's why he had to go and get rid of the AllSpark, because to him, none of them should have the power to use the AllSpark, because if it fell into the wrong hands, then it would bring about the end of the Cybertronian race as everyone knows it, and therefore explains to Thrash, Twitch, and the rest of the Terrans that they are essentially the last hope of the Cybertronian race, that they're supposed to not make the same mistakes he did and show the world or in the rest of the universe why Cybertronians shouldn't be something to fear. By this point, Mo and Thrash then ask Megatron why the AllSpark was so important, besides creating just an army of Transformers, and why they had to throw it away into the space bridge. And so Megatron then explains to them both and the rest of the Terrans that the reason why they need to get the AllSpark through the space bridge was because Cybertron was dying without it, which of course is something we've seen throughout many, many different incarnations of Cybertron throughout the Transformers franchise, specifically the Prime continuity version of Cybertron, and I believe, and Cybertron, in the Cyberverse version. So Megatron explains to them all that the Decepticons had the AllSpark towards the end of the war, and it was at this point that Megatron did end up defecting to the Autobots, but was sort of, like, undercover to the degree where a lot of Decepticons did know that Megatron had converted to the Autobots, but not all of them did. So Megatron was tasked by Optimus to go ahead and try and sneak behind enemy lines to steal the AllSpark back from the Decepticons so that they could get it through the space bridge and return to Cybertron so that the AllSpark could be returned to it and therefore heal Cybertron. However, things didn't go as planned, as we saw in the beginning of this episode, so Optimus decided to do the next best thing, which was to destroy the space bridge and hope that when Megatron threw it into the AllSpark into it, that would have gotten the AllSpark back to Cybertron as well. But to them, they believe truly that it didn't work and that Cybertron is dead and therefore every other Transformer that was left on Cybertron. So therefore, Megatron, Optimus, Alita, pretty much every other Autobot and Decepticon on Earth are the only living Transformers to them, aside from Twitch, Thrash, and the rest of the Terrans. Though then we get a flashback showing exactly how Megatron got the AllSpark from the Decepticon hands, and I absolutely love this scene. We get another really cool transition here to flashback back to roughly 2005, where as Megatron is speaking in front of this big statue made of himself throwing the AllSpark, which seems to be covered with a bunch of Decepticon graffiti calling him a traitor and all that, the camera goes underground to a secret lab underneath the AllSpark, or the Space Bridge Memorial Park, where we see Shockwave working on several test tubes and a computer and all that. And I absolutely love how the camera transitions, that it seems like it's going underground, but not only goes underground, it goes back in time, which again, I really, really love that. So while Shockwave is working, Megatron sneaks in to try and grab the AllSpark off this pedestal that Shockwave has it on, but then Shockwave detects Megatron. They sort of have this conversation about how they need the AllSpark to basically turn Earth into the next Cybertron, but Megatron doesn't want that to happen and therefore subject more humans and Autobots into dying for it, which Shockwave doesn't have a problem with. It's at this point also where we finally find out who is going to be voicing Shockwave, and surprise, surprise, Shockwave is voiced by none other than Troy Baker, which I was immediately picked up on, and was honestly surprised by how well Troy Baker actually plays Shockwave. It's such a unique take on Shockwave that harkens a bit back to Corey Burton's performance as him in G1 animated, but also doing his own little spin on it, which I really, really like. For any who don't remember Troy Baker, he also previously did another Transformers role back in Robots in Disguise, where he was the main antagonist, Steeljaw, and I absolutely loved his performance as Steeljaw in that show. Easily one of my favorite villains across the entire Transformers franchise, so I'm happy that he actually has appeared in a lot of other Transformers stuff since then, most notably the most recent Last Spot Standing IDW comic that came out last year as the main antagonist of that. But Troy Baker also, before that, voiced several other characters in the War for Cybertron games, specifically Jetfire and Jazz. So Troy Baker's Shockwave voice is not like any of those, though. If you don't remember him from any other things, you may recognize him as the voice of Joel in The Last of Us, Sam Drake in Uncharted, Pain and Yamato in Naruto, and among many other stuff. And for any Telltale fans, you'll recognize him also as the voice of Bruce Wayne in Batman the Telltale series, and Reese in Tales from the Borderlands 1, before he was replaced by Ray Chase in Borderlands 3 and Tales from the Borderlands 2. So I think Troy Baker's Shockwave voice seems to sound a lot like his Pain voice from Naruto, with a bit of a British accent thrown in there that resembles a lot of Corey Burton's performance as Shockwave and animated in G1. And I think it really, really fits Shockwave, that Troy Baker really makes him sound like this really aristocratic, upper-class Decepticon who really feels like he's doing what's right and that everyone else is beneath him, that no one else gets what he's doing. So I absolutely love that. So as Megatron and Shockwave are arguing, I absolutely love the camera work throughout this, and that's only because of the amazing work the storyboard artist did, which this episode was also storyboarded by none other than Stephanie Ressler, And if you don't remember her, she previously did the storyboards, as you remember back in my review of last batch with episode 6 Traditions. She did a lot of storyboards for that episode as well, and also did some for episode 13, Missed Connection. So I'm going to be showing a little, like, storyboard sequence of this scene with Megatron and Shockwave compared to the final version. I absolutely love how Nickelodeon adapted her storyboards into this scene. I love Roy McCann and Troy Baker's performances as Megatron and Shockwave here as well. While Megatron and Shockwave argue over what to do with the EarthSpark, Shockwave reveals like a big plan he's got for Megatron that will essentially ensure a Decepticon victory and total control of Earth. So he activates his monitor where he reveals that he's got several hundreds of protoforms that he has personally assembled laying dormant underground the space bridge, which he explains to Megatron that with the EarthSpark he'll use it to bring life to all these protoforms and therefore create the perfect Decepticon army that will annihilate everyone else on Earth, which Megatron is absolutely horrified by. So, not wanting this plan to go through, Megatron quickly shoves Shockwave into this cryogenic, like, sleep chamber that is of like, many that are scattered across the lab. So, Megatron activates that, freezing Shockwave and putting him into stasis, where he's been for the past 15 years. And then Megatron grabs the EarthSpark to take it out just in time when Optimus and Bumblebee get there too, and that leads back into the scene before where we had Megatron, Optimus, and Bumblebee all doing a big baton race to try and get the EarthSpark back to the space bridge. The flashback ends shortly after Megatron throws Shockwave into the cryopod, where we get a third repeat of this whole baton race of him, Bee, and Optimus trying to get the EarthSpark to the space bridge. And that, to me, is honestly my biggest con with this episode. Not that there's any problem with, like, Megatron's delivery of any lines throughout this episode or actions that happen. The biggest thing that I have problem with this is basically we lose about 2 to 3 minutes of this episode because for some reason they feel like they have to show the exact same fight with all the Autobots and Decepticons battling each other on a space bridge 3 separate times. And I get it, they don't show the whole thing at all 3 times, but they pretty much show the same thing 3 times. And to me, it just feels like nonsensical filler that we really don't need in this scene. But I digress, that's really only that's just a big problem I have with this episode, which isn't really like a big problem, but it's just my biggest complaint with this whole episode. But as the flashback ends for, thankfully, the final time, Megatron essentially explains to them, explains how by throwing the EarthSpark into the space bridge as it blew up, to him, he believes that the EarthSpark is destroyed along with Cybertron now since it never got back there, and therefore, their hope of resurrecting the Cybertronian race is all but gone. So, all the Terrans feel immediately bad by this because now they understand why Megatron might have been have a PTSD reaction to them playing, like, pretending to play the fight as a big game to them. And so Megatron explains how, because of this war, the whole Cybertronian race nearly got extinct, and that because of this, the Terrans need to learn and do better and not basically choose violence and try to find another way to fight for their own rights, which we see clearly affects Thrash to the point where he, again, really doesn't feel like it's his job to fix the wrongs that Megatron did. And that leads to another beautiful moment here between him and Mo shortly after, where after he storms off from the rest of the Terrans and Robbie, Mo goes after to chase him, and they have this deep conversation, or not really a deep conversation even, but where Thrash is just venting to Mo about how he feels the stress of he feels stressed from all the pressure Megatron is putting on him and the rest of his brothers and sisters by having the fate of the Cybertron race put on him for actions that seemingly he wasn't responsible for. And I like how Mo takes the time to listen to Thrash here, and even Thrash is confused by this first, because when he starts talking to Mo about, like, how unfair it is that Megatron expects him, Twitch, and everyone else to clean up his mess, he notices that Mo's not talking and asks why, which Mo says that she just wants to listen first before she gives him any advice, which I really think is, again, really emotionally mature for Mo to do this. The fact that she's only 9 years old and yet is still so emotionally mature, it's great, especially thinking back to their conversation about Swindle in episode 4. It seems like a very natural continuation of that emotional maturity that Mo and Thrash have, and how, really, again, we never get to see Thrash show more of his softer, more sensitive side, and Mo is really the only one who ever gets to see this side of him, with the exception maybe of Twitch back in episode 14. But yeah, it's so cool to see now how close of a bond Mo and Thrash do have, and although we see Robbie and Twitch have this to some degree throughout some episodes, to me, I really don't feel like they've got such of a deep connection like Mo and Thrash do, which I think is really, really cool. So after Thrash basically explains how he feels pressured and not feels it's unfair that Megatron expects him and the rest of the Terrans to do better and be the solution to save the Cybertronian race when it wasn't their fault for why Megatron got into this position in the first place. Mo explains that while he doesn't exactly expect Thrash and everyone else to clean up his mess, she believes he's basically telling them to try and avoid the mistakes he did and therefore be a better person than Megatron was, which I think is really cool. The fact that Megatron doesn't like say that he's without fault. He's not trying to say that, oh, I did no wrong, woe is me and all that. He knows he screwed up and that he's trying to make amends for it by explaining to the Terrans what he did wrong and how they can avoid it, which really gives Thrash a lot of hope, and I love that. As Mo and Thrash finally come back to Megatron and the rest of the Terrans, though, they're interrupted by none other than Shockwave emerging from a cave next to the space bridge. Because as we saw in a little scene before this, Shockwave managed to escape from his cryopod because after being stuck in there for 15 years in the abandoned lab, the cryopod eventually failed and he managed to break out. So he aims his, like, what we presume to be his laser cannon, because that's what Shockwave normally has in most continuities, at Megatron, pretending to kill him. But then Megatron explains to Shockwave that the war has been over because he's been offline for several years. Shockwave doesn't believe him, though, and all of a sudden, his supposed laser cannon opens up, and it's actually like a grappling hook, where he ends up grabbing Thrash by the face and pulling him towards him, and then scans him with his arm, therefore reading all of his memories throughout the past 15 episodes. And I absolutely love, too, how throughout the quick flashes of every single episode that has happened in the past, they're all in chronological order, where we start with episode 1, going by every single episode very quickly until we get to episode 15 in Bare Necessities, the last episode. So Shockwave essentially just learns everything that Thrash has been throughout the past 15 episodes in the course of maybe 2 seconds, and he is absolutely disgusted by Terrans, which I think really, I feel like this really fits EarthSpark's Shockwave's character, where he feels that he's this very superior, perfect Decepticon, that he wants the Decepticons to be this ultimate race of sorts, that no other Cybertronian gets the rights to live except for his own very special Cybertronian race, Decepticons, which clearly upsets Megatron even more, because the way he says, I love the vitriol in Shockwave's voice, where he talks to Megatron about how he's disgusted by him, that he would side with these lower class hybrids, as he prefers it. And then the second Megatron hears Shockwave utter the word class, he goes like absolutely crazy and goes to attack Shockwave, which I absolutely love too, how that sort of harkens back to Prime and IDW Megatron, where their backstory was all about how they detested the Cybertronian government for sort of having a classist system where the more upper class Cybertronians prospered while the lower class Cybertronians, who Megatron is in most continuities, end up being oppressed by them. So the fact that Shockwave is sort of one of those aristocratic Cybertronians that wants to return to the classist system is a really cool way to show, like, to differentiate this version of Shockwave from other versions, and I love that. So immediately, Megatron goes to try and save Thrash from Shockwave, but then he pulls out this gun on him, which Megatron realizes is the Immobilizer. Now, if you don't remember the Immobilizer from other Transformers continuities, it's this device that allows basically anyone shot with it to become frozen solid. And the way its design has changed a lot throughout the different Transformers continuities. Like in G1, it was just this big device that Wheeljack invented. In the Prime continuity, it was this Cybertronian relic that took the form of a staff that anyone could use. And then in Cyberverse, it was this big weapon created by Trypticon and the rest of the mercenary Transformers to freeze everyone on Cybertron so they could try and just loot everything on it. But in EarthSpark, it kind of resembles more so a mix between the G1 Immobilizer and the Prime Immobilizer, where it's just sort of this one-handed pistol that Shockwave uses that takes design aesthetics from both the Prime and G1 incarnations. So, as Megatron goes to try and free Thrash from Shockwave, drops Thrash and fires at Megatron, and while Megatron is able to dodge the blast, he does end up hitting Twitch, hashtag and Jawbreaker, freezing them. So at this point, it's just Robbie, Mo, Thrash, and Nightshade, while Megatron is battling Shockwave. And so when Shockwave realizes that essentially the war's over and there's no way he's going to be able to bring his protoform army to life because the Allspark's just gone somewhere, he decides what he's going to do is essentially turn himself into a suicide bomb and blow up the lab underneath the space bridge so that it would have enough force to not only destroy this whole park, but also the entirety of Witwicky with it and everyone with it. So it's at this point where Nightshade and Thrash realize they have to go and disable the bomb. So Shockwave won't be able to blow up all of Wiki, while Megatron is forced to deal with Shockwave alone. And so we get this really interesting dynamic where we cut back to Robbie, Thrash, and Nightshade trying to disarm the bombs, where Nightshade is sort of walking Thrash and Robbie as to how to disable by cutting across all these cables and all that inside Shockwave's lab, while meanwhile we see that Megatron and Mo are battling Shockwave in this big dome over Space Bridge Park, which Shockwave has put up to keep Megatron and Mo from getting out. Or actually, no, he puts the thing up to keep Megatron in, and when Thrash and Nightshade go to try and help Megatron, they can't get in because it's an Energon force field. But as you remember back in episode 4, Mo as a human is unable to be affected by the force field, so she goes in to help Megatron, while Robbie, Thrash, and Nightshade go to disable the bombs. And we get this really awesome fight between Megatron and Shockwave, where we get to see Shockwave's alt mode in EarthSpark, and it's actually very similar to his Cyberverse alt mode, where he turns into this big Cybertronian spider tank, but however, unlike Cyberverse Shockwave, who had more of a general spider aesthetic, where he had the really thick legs and actually jumped around and all that, EarthSpark Shockwave is a lot sleeker and slimmer than Cyberverse Shockwave, and he actually just rolls around, so he's sort of like not so much of a spider, but more of just like a giant rolling tank that sort of just spins around, and it has a front cannon in the center of him that he just fights shooting at Megatron. So as the fight continues, Shockwave eventually does get Megatron down, shoots him into some rubble, and Megatron sort of tries to play dead at this point, while just taking all of these shots, Shockwave's just repeatedly shooting at Megatron as he's down laying in all this rubble, waiting for Shockwave to drop his guard. And as Shockwave goes up to presumably finish off Megatron, we see Mo trying to free him from a bunch of debris, which just gives Megatron enough time to prepare his ambush on Shockwave. So as Shockwave aims his gun arm at Mo, planning to kill her, she jumps out of the way, and then Megatron pulls up with the immobilizer in his hand, ends up getting a shot off on Shockwave, able to freeze him, and therefore, just at the exact same time, Nightshade and Thrash manage to disable all the bombs, saving the rest of Wiki in the process. Once Shockwave is dealt with, the episode ends earlier the next morning with Megatron putting Shockwave in a ghost convoy to be taken away by a ghost to the same jail that Starscream, Soundwave, and the rest of the Decepticons are being held at. Though the fact is that Shockwave is still frozen with the immobilizer, and since Megatron has the immobilizer, which he actually used, by the way, to unfreeze Twitch, hashtag, and Jawbreaker, it makes me wonder how Shockwave will actually break out, if he does at all. Is he just going to stay permanently frozen? Because, to my knowledge, the only way you can unfreeze someone with the immobilizer is if you shoot them again with the immobilizer. So does Megatron still have the immobilizer? Did he turn it over to Ghost? I don't know. Maybe he destroyed it or something. I don't know. But it would be interesting to see Shockwave come back again, because I think Troy Baker did do a really good job as him. But we'll have to wait and see. Anyway, once Shockwave is taken away by Ghost, all the Terrans thank Megatron for all the advice and explaining to them all how the Transformer War ended and what it means to Megatron and what convinced him to switch sides. Though hashtag does ask Megatron, like, if there's any other last advice that he can give them all for how they can be successful at being the next generation and last hope for the Cybertronian race. And Megatron gives this absolutely incredible speech, which, again, I said this a lot with my review of episode 12 outtakes, but if you just flip a few words around as how Megatron gives this last closing monologue to the Terrans, it really, really has, like, LGBT undertones to it, like, of how, like, LGBT people fighting for their rights, or even, like, other minorities to it in the same regards, which I honestly think is such an empowering message. The fact that Megatron of all characters is saying this, it's really, really good speech. And Rory McCann, honestly, this is his best performance as Megatron in the 16 episodes so far. And considering this is Megatron's last appearance in this batch of episodes, though I'm sure he'll be back in the final batch as well, I think this is a great final episode for Megatron as well. And so I'll just go ahead and let this speech play for itself, which I'll hopefully try to keep as much of it intact as I can, but I don't know what YouTube will and will not let me show, so hopefully it all comes through. But anyway, yeah, you guys gotta hear this.
When the day comes for you to emerge from hiding, expect harsh words from those who do not understand. Stand up for yourselves, yes, but remember, do not let your disagreements divide you. The Decepticons and Autobots could have accomplished so much more if we had remembered that. Do not do what we did. Do better.
And so that was my review of Transformers EarthSpark Season 1, Episode 16, Warzone. And wow, we're looking at all the time, I noticed these reviews are getting a lot longer compared to my review of the first batch, but that's just because there's so much to talk about with these batch of episodes that I really, really love them. If I had to rate this episode, I would easily give it a 9.5 out of 10. Definitely my second or third favorite episode of this batch, easily tied with Outtakes, or maybe a bit better than it. I love how Megatron interacts with all the Terrans here, that we get a proper Megatron-centric episode. Thrash and Mo's interactions, I should say, give a lot better continuation and deeper understanding of Thrash's character, which I really like to see after we got that Thrash-centric episode with House Rules in the last batch. Shockwave was a really fun villain to have, and I like how different his ideals are compared to other versions of Shockwave. Though, really, Prime Shock, or EarthSpark Shockwave is very similar to IDW Shockwave, actually, in terms of the fact that he was a really classist individual as well. But, again, it was a really, really good episode. The only con, again, is the fact that they just put so much emphasis on showing the same fight over and over and over again with the space bridge, and I get it. We get Nickelodeon. You couldn't have filled those 3 minutes with something else? Jeez. But yeah, that was it. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll be back next week with my final review of EarthSpark for now, and that will be with the finale of this batch of EarthSpark, episodes 17 and 18, Home Parts 1 and 2. If you like this review, be sure to like, comment, and of course subscribe, and I will see you guys later.